Good evening. I'm Chris Biltoft, and I'm a meteorologist with a background in atmospheric dispersion and modeling. Is that better? Okay. And I just want to start off by saying that I've spent the last 4 or 5 years attempting to communicate with PGV and communicate with the Department of Health to try to explain what needs to happen in order to have a reasonable monitoring program and to develop a reasonable emergency notification and evacuation plan. It hasn't worked. We're still where we were 5 years ago. So apparently we have to do it the hard way. And so therefore I am requesting a contested case hearing, and I expect to see you folks at that hearing. And here's the paperwork for you. I'm not going to waste a lot of your time, but I'm just going to go over some of the highlights of why we're in this situation. First of all, we have, of course, inadequate monitoring and an inadequate emergency response plan, exacerbated by state and local officials who, in their zeal to promote geothermal energy and through ignorance or willful neglect, have failed to adequately monitor plant emissions and neglected the implementation of an effective emergency response plan. This all needs to be addressed in the non-covered source permit. There's the application of an inappropriate standard. You take measurements that occur on the order of 1 minute, and you do some averaging to 1 hour. Well, hydrogen sulfide, like many toxic gases, has a peculiarity in that short-term exposure to high concentrations is much more deleterious to your health and safety than long-term exposure to low concentrations. And by doing this hourly averaging, you're washing out the important information that's available. People are being exposed to high concentrations over short periods of time and are suffering the consequences, and you don't carry it in your data. And that needs to change. Withholding of community right to know information, and this is fairly ludicrous. There's the general duty clause of section 112R and 40 CFR part 370, all this is in my written report, that requires the PGV present information about their releases and the types of chemicals that they store on site. But I did a FOIA request through EPA, and I got a document. It was a cover letter for the community right to know data for 1 year. And so I got the cover letter, and the rest of the document was CBI, confidential business information. That is wrong, that is illegal, that cannot happen anymore. In your permit, you've got to address and make sure that information that should be available to the public is available to the public. Likewise, failure to file toxic release inventory reports. The EPA lifted its administrative stay on hydrogen sulfide in 2012. Has PGV ever filed a TRI report? I've never seen one. You better start doing it because it's in the law. It's required. It needs to be in the NSP. And I can go on. I mean, there's all kinds of failures here. Non-compliance with Hawaii administrative rules. Does not comply with monitoring requirements of HAR Title 11, Chapters 60.1-11 through 14 and 68, which include the requirement to source sample. You have to measure it at the source where it's coming out of the pipe. You don't stick 2 or 3 or 4 monitors out in the woods somewhere and expect to use that as a basis for sampling. That's ridiculous, and you should know better. There's a requirement also for air quality monitoring for windborne concentrations of toxic gases. Actually, the county is trying to set something like that up, but it's getting no cooperation from the Department of Health or from PGV. And frankly, it's in your best interest to cooperate with this project. Deficient quality control. The NSP only requires quality assurance checks. Now, quality assurance is a paperwork exercise. You look it up and say, okay, I've got all these things written down. They haven't changed since I looked at them yesterday, so everything must be okay. Quality assurance is very different from quality control. We need quality control. You have to look at the equipment. You have to calibrate the equipment. You have to test to make sure things are right. You can't just rely on a paperwork exercise. That needs to be in the non-covered source permit. We talked about improper record redaction. The only thing the PGV is allowed by law to redact is secret processes or methods of manufacture. Everything else should be available to the public. That needs to be in the non-covered source permit. You can't get away with it anymore, boys. And finally, I want to talk about silica. Now, that's something that is not in the non-covered source permit, but every time you clean out a well or a pipe casing or something, there's silica involved. That silica goes somewhere. And I don't know what your process is. Does it go into the air? If it goes into the air, that's a problem. So that needs to be addressed in the non-covered source permit. So I could go on, but I'm not going to waste any more of your time. And thank you for listening to me.
Anyway, just a couple points I want to share with everyone. First off, I do want to send appreciation to the folks from Department of Health for coming out here and taking the time to listen to everyone here tonight. My next point is that PGV, and by the way, I'm an employee of PGV since 1991. Puna Geothermal Venture supports the renewal of this non-covered source permit. And the primary reasons is that, number one, our number one concern for our folks at the plant, we have 30 full-time employees, numerous contractors, subcontractors, and our primary concern is safety and environmental compliance. You know, we concentrate and focus inside the fence line. That's our primary responsibilities. And with that, you know, the result is that if we keep our folks safe, then it translates into keeping the folks outside of our community, outside of our fence line in the community safe. So we take safety, environmental compliance very seriously. You know, like I said, we do continuous training, all of our employees, and compliance. I want to speak to compliance. The air permit is one of several different permits that we have to abide by. We have an injection permit with DOH. We have DLNR permits. We have federal permits on the injection side, and other programs that we have to abide by the EPA. You know, and I've heard some comments about self-regulating, and you know, part of this is that industry has to be responsible and has to report, or else, if you find out, if DOH or DLNR or EPA finds out that we're hiding something or we're lying, that's bad news, you know, and I don't know how many of you would come to visit me at the jail, but I don't want to go to jail. And none of our guys, so compliance is very serious, safety is very serious. You know, I talk about safety and our employees. You know, our employees are from the community. We have employees that live in Leilani. We have employees that live in Puna, Paradise Park, all the way up to Volcano and through Hilo. You know, and we're very serious about safety, and we want our guys to go home to their families. They have children, they have families. We want them to go home in the same safe condition that they arrived. You know, and that's primarily our main point. So my last thing is that we do support the renewal of the non-covered source permit.
Thank you. Well, I'm the president of Malama o Puna. Malama o Puna is a 501c3 environmental nonprofit operating in and for the District of Puna, Island County, and State of Hawaii. We are a membership organization, and most of our members reside in Puna, with many of them living within 4.1 miles and or downwind of the Puna Geothermal Venture plant. Many of our members have been complaining for years that their health has been negatively impacted by plant operations which are not sufficiently regulated by the Hawaii Department of Health. They expect us to advocate on their behalf. During the 1990 blowout, my property, which is a little farther away from the plant than the 4.1 miles, suffered damages. Dead honeybees, which resulted in crop losses, and the death of a young, healthy, vigorous buck. There were dead birds lying in the streets of Pahoa. I filed suit, along with others, and PGV settled. So I have a personal interest in that my property was threatened by the blowout, which is directly attributable to the Hawaii Department of Health failure to adequately regulate and monitor PGV. Malama o Puna's mission is to, quote, preserve Hawaii's precious natural heritage by various means, including advocacy. Our exempt purpose is to assure critical habitat for native species and open space for future generations through environmental education, hands-on projects, and acquisition of real property for preservation, protection, and restoration. And that's in our Articles of Incorporation, our bylaws, Article 2, Section 1, Objectives and Purposes. To the extent that emissions of harmful gases, particulates, and heavy metals also have deleterious effects on local, rare, and endangered native wildlife, that would be the eo, pueo, opeapea, and the a'o, in the vicinity of the BGV plant, we are stating that we testify on their behalf and therefore have standing per Palila versus State of Hawaii. This is not a new or revolutionary concept. Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 342B-1, Air Pollution Control, gives the definition of air pollution as, quote, the presence in the outdoor air of substances in quantities and for durations which may endanger human health or welfare, plant or animal life, or property, or which may unreasonably interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property throughout the state as are affected thereby, but excludes all aspects of employer-employees relationships as to health and safety hazards, unquote. This leads me into a cautionary note that failure of Hawaii Department of Health to protect rare and endangered species in its permit process and or rulemaking can be subject to violations under the Endangered Species Act. I don't think you want to go there. It is obvious from the inception of the PGV permit that the Department of Health permit is not sufficiently inclusive or stringent to protect the public health, including animals. If it were, there wouldn't have been such an ongoing community opposition to their operations. This room wouldn't be filled tonight. And the Hawaii Department of Health has the mandate to be proactive in protecting public health. It has the moral responsibility to err on the side of caution. It has not done so. We now have 13 years of experience with PGV under the original permit, and any new permit should incorporate lessons learned and add new protections. You should not just renew the permit as is without changes. For example, The EPA has fined PGV for not calibrating their air quality monitoring equipment as frequently as required. As a result, all the readings sent to Department of Health are suspect and very likely inaccurate. It is impossible for the Department of Health to take corrective action if the reports are of dubious veracity. To remedy this situation, Department of Health should not only require regular, every 6 months at the most, calibration reports from PGV, but it should do random spot checks to confirm that the monitors are accurate. Otherwise, we are allowing the fox to guard the henhouse, and we all know how well that works. The County of Hawaii formed the Geothermal Public Health Assessment Working Group, also known as the Adler Group, to study the available literature, plant emission records, and other materials, and make recommendations for a county-funded health study. Besides determining what the health study should encompass, the group also made recommendations to improve the monitoring and public notification emergency response systems. The group consisted of community members and scientists. The new NSP should include those recommendations as they relate to airborne particulates and other pollutants, and ensure that PGV is required to take corrective action and that the Department of Health will not renege on its responsibility to do on-the-ground oversight. The final report of the group can be made available to Department of Health through the Office of the Mayor in case you don't have it. The current permit measures allowable emissions based on a formula using an hourly average of parts per million. This may be appropriate for some situations, especially where exposure is to healthy adults over a short-term and normal work week schedule. It is not, however, appropriate or in the best interests of the general public that resides in proximity to the plant and consists of a very different exposed population, namely seniors, people with respiratory problems, young children, and pregnant women, or for that matter, birds. There have been ample studies that indicate that the chronic low-level exposure, as well as explosive releases on occasion, have very different impacts on such a civilian population. OSHA standards were not designed for and are not applicable to the general public. Hourly averaging is not sufficient to determine health impacts and should not be the criteria used in the new permit. The new permit has to change its standards in order to properly address this problem, and it has to reflect the current scientific knowledge. It is known from PGV's own files that the working group was given and studied that there are heavy metals, such as arsenic, cadmium, selenium, mercury, and lead, toxic gases, such as radon and hydrogen sulfide, caustic soda, and silicate particulates that are released during upset conditions at the plant. Yet PGV is not required to monitor or test for them. The reason given the public is that the amount is already a given per amount of H2S released. This statement has never been either challenged or backed up by evidence, which leads to the inescapable conclusion that perhaps there is none. That perhaps it is put forward in order to help PGV avoid having to be required to measure and report the quantity of toxins being released into a residential community. Excuse me. The new NSP permit should require that these measurements be done whenever there are releases, and that samples should be taken and turned over to the Department of Health for testing. Further, that the permit should identify with scientific studies how much or how little of these toxins can be released before triggering fines and corrective action. The permit should list permissible levels and hold PGV to them. During Hurricane Iselle, PGV had to shut down its operations on short notice, and this resulted in emissions of pollutants into a community that was already incapable of evacuating due to fallen albizia trees blocking roads and driveways. The permit must address situations such as natural disasters and provide PGV with clear guidelines to prevent the recurrence of these sorts of situations. We must learn from these past errors and omissions, or else we are doomed to repeat the harm to people, animals, and property. Protecting those by improving the permit to incorporate everything we have learned since 1990 is the Department of Health's primary responsibility. If the permit doesn't do that, then Department of Health is responsible for any harm done by virtue of its failure. There are other issues that we can raise concerning the draft NSP, but we reserve the right to bring them to the table during a contested case hearing, which we are requesting herewith. And I want to add one little thing to that, that I was just reading the permit, and it says that the monitors have to operate at all times, except when, basically, when there are emissions, when they're doing maintenance such as well cleanouts. And so it's a total crock, and nobody's going to be protected if the monitors aren't going at the times when it's most likely that there are going to be emissions. Thank you very much.
I strongly support on-site monitoring of HS emissions as well as other toxic gases at the source of the release at PGV plant, as well as increased frequency of monitoring of the emissions in the neighborhood, minimally every 10 minutes. As a resident on Pohohiki Road, 1 mile from the PG plant, and the owner-operator Pahoa Chiropractic for the past 12 years, I speak for myself and many others who could not be here tonight when I say that it is time for the DOH to do the job it is obligated to do. Protect the citizens who are forced to live within the ever-expanding development of PGV with no protection from the hazard of this potentially dangerous industrial plant. Do the right thing now. I want to share a story I had with Mr. Mike Calachini, who for the majority of the time the plant's been there has been the plant manager. About 7 weeks ago, when the first major hurricane was coming our way, it was Category 5, about 2 days out. And I called up Mike and I asked him, are you planning to shut down the plant if you need to? And he says, yeah, of course. And I said, how long will that take? And he said, about an hour. And I said, well, you know, Mike, I'm concerned because last year you didn't shut it down and a lot of people were hurt. And what he said to me was, well, where are they now? And what I sensed was he was inferring that where's the proof that 150 people were injured? And I think that's the crux of the matter, is that without the proper monitoring, really proper monitoring, we don't have the proof. They can prove they're doing wrong or right. We can't, as citizens and residents, prove that they have done something wrong. So it's really essential that we get this monitoring done correctly, and it's in everybody's hands to see. Thank you very much.
Aloha, my name is Sophia Wilt. I live in Leilani Estates. I kind of find it curious that we weren't given more notice about this meeting. Seems kind of impromptu. I don't have anything officially prepared. I wanted to talk about my experience the night of August 7th when I cell hit. I was in my house in Leilani Estates with the power out, and I thankfully just switched my service so that I actually had cell phone service. The only way I found out about the event was from Facebook by a friend. Hardly not the best way to actually find out about such an event. I was amazed. I called the police department and civil defense. They offered almost no information except if I felt uncomfortable, I should leave, which was woefully inadequate considering there was a tree across my driveway, and even if I had been able to get out past that, I wouldn't have been able to get anywhere. I was knocked unconscious for many hours, and I felt extremely ill for days following. I went to my doctor, and she diagnosed me with reactive pneumonia, as in having been exposed to something to cause massive irritation in my lungs. I find it interesting that the Department of Health can just say, without any investigation, I was never contacted, that that was in fact true. It completely invalidates so many different people's experiences of having been either knocked unconscious or any other kind of wrongdoing an event like that. I am really grateful for Puna Pono Alliance because that was the group that I turned to start getting information because there was nobody else out there. The Department of Health, the county, nobody was even really acknowledging it was much of an issue. I remember the headline on the newspaper a few days following the event. Department of Health basically deemed it, you know, a non-event and that nobody could have gotten hurt. So I would like to echo what Tom Travis said and all the recommendations that he made. The permit as it stands is again woefully inadequate, and it needs to be seriously revised as well as enforced to ensure public safety. Thank you.
I apologize, I'm going to be fumbling around with things, but as I was listening to speakers, before I came, I decided to, tonight, just read to you things that I wrote in the past, because I'm now talking to the people representing the Department of Health. I know none of you here are the decision makers, and none of these are to attack anyone, but for you to please try to understand the people here are the residents of this place, and they're the victims of our inadequacies. I disagree with Chris, our meteorologist, who made a very nice presentation in regards to the monitoring system. He started off by saying we have an inadequate monitoring system. Where I disagree with him is we don't even have a system. I'm going to read things that I wrote back in 1990 when ORMAT in the development of the geothermal plant that you refer to as PGV. And actually we have pages and pages of document, some of it which I lost or was destroyed. These are things that I happen to have, so please bear with me because it is out of context. But I need all of us to know, and I'm asking the Department of Health, whoever's listening to this, to review information of past. You have to take this in context of past. And one of the things that ORMAT was required to do in meeting the requirements of the emergency response plan, which was required of them by the county, is that they identify scenarios or incidents within the plant that might affect your safety. And memory escapes me now, but I think there were 10 or 11 scenarios that they identified as possible incidents or scenarios that may cause contamination, pollution, or release of H2S that might affect you, the citizens of this area. And I'm just going to read you one paragraph, but I am asking also for whoever is listening to this for the Department of Health, you can call me if you can't find it within your archives, because this is information that I wrote down in 1990. The scenarios presented by ORMAT indicates that a distance of 15 miles could receive hydrogen sulfide levels of 210 parts per billion under scenario number 3, if well blowout occurred at well number 8. The same scenario indicates possibility of a distance of 4.1 mile would fall under the warning level of over 1,000 parts per billion or 1 part per million. Out of the 12 scenarios presented, it showed that 8 of them could possibly affect a distance of over 15 miles on a watch level of over 25 parts per billion. Now, if you kind of digest that a bit, you can see the seriousness of what we're talking about. The other thing, those are things, again, pointed out in 1990. This I took on my handwriting to take out excerpts of, but it's almost verbatim, on things of my conclusion to them. It is strongly recommended that this county and state establish standards of H2S based on the nuisance factor and not the hazard level. The hazard level, as you know, is always based on OSHA, which is always based on a strong, healthy working individual of that area. Not the hazard level that residents are asked to tolerate, should consider not only normal operations, but routine and upset conditions as well. Reference is made to standards by New Mexico based on the nuisance level. It is strongly requested that a total review be done on the levels of H2X exposure for the sensitive portion of the population so that possible evacuation guidelines can be developed for these groups. At the present time, as you know, a watch is established at 25 parts per billion to 1,000 parts per billion, and at above 1,000 parts per billion, a warning level for evacuation. The supply table for H2S toxicity should include numbers for sensitive portions of the communities, such as the infirm, the infants, the elderly, and pregnant women, and which at this time it does not. And to me, at that time when I wrote that, I was appalled by the failure of our government not to recognize to me a basic principle of that in all emergency plans. I mean, just because my friend can take me, for example. I cannot drink alcohol. You give me a teaspoon of alcohol and I'm under the table. But I'm sure most of you can drink a tablespoon. I'm just going to read you my summary and end it. I know it's been a long night. This is my summary again. I wrote in 1990. The county and state governments must ensure that violations of any provision that especially affect the health and welfare of the island's people be dealt with, and we do not allow the deplorable conditions and violations of the past geothermal project to ever occur again. I feel without doubt that it was a failure of responsible government agencies, of which I was one, to enforce the special conditions specified for HGPA that have caused so much of distrust and hostility towards geothermal projects and the capabilities of government to monitor and enforce regulations. Thank you.
Harry's a hard person to follow, but I want to first thank all of you for coming out in force and for your pertinent and respectful testimony. I think that the people that read your testimony and hear your testimony will realize that we're not just a bunch of mad, raving protesters. There is real harm being done. I see, after hearing all your testimony, I feel that I boiled it down to 3 or 4 things. That, first of all, there's a lack of common sense. This is just nonsensical, and really, there's a lack of, and there's a lack of looking out for the public good. And in this case, the public good is health and safety. And the worst thing is, there's a lack of government action. The government is not doing their job to protect the people in Puna. So boil it down to those 3 things, and there's much more. There's a science involved in everything, but basically, there is no common sense. There's no sense to this whole madness. So I stand in opposition to the renewal of the permit. Some background. I grew up in Honolulu, and I was 13 years old when Hawaii became a state in 1959. And Honolulu was a beautiful place then. Well, at that time, Harry was already graduating high school. And even as a 13-year-old, I was thinking to myself, Hawaii, a state, wow, there's going to be rapid change. I didn't know how much, and I didn't know how fast. But what I couldn't stand, and what prompted me to move to this beautiful island, was irreversible damage because of corporate greed and dirty politics. And that's really what, and so I found my haven in Kalapana and Opikau. And I thought I found nirvana. And in 1979, I was accosted by one of the first geothermal exploratory wells. I was living on 80 acres of land in Opikau, beautiful dark nights, silence, 180-degree ocean view. And all of a sudden, I was submitted to 11 months of 24/7 drilling, 600 feet from my home that I established. So I did some research. But back in 1979, research was hard. It wasn't easy as going Google and looking at that. But by making calls and calling around the state and calling around the county, I found out that there were no restrictions on geothermal, not the placement, because they came right into where I was living for 12 years. There wasn't a restriction in air pollution. There wasn't a restriction on noise. They lit up my home like a football field. There was no light pollution, and there were no, of course, no water pollution standards. Now, here we are, 36 years later from 1979. Yeah, we got rules, we got restrictions, but the plain fact is they're not being followed, they're not being monitored. So what good are they if this isn't happening? It's people not doing their job. It's people not doing their job. It's PGV not making it safe, because look at where they are. It's the Board of Land and Natural Resources placing heavy industry right next to subdivision. They're not doing their job. And the Department of Health, I'm sad to say, you're not doing your job. And that's why these people are here. This is real. This is real. And there have been people that have been harmed. We're modern people here. We're not against alternative energy and reducing carbon dioxide in the planet and about climate change and everything. We're modern people. There's a science involved here. And the scientific facts say that this heavy industry should not continue in our neighborhoods. Absolutely not. And listen to these people. I gotta say that this is a great turnout, and you guys have been real respectful, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming out here and giving you. I hope you guys are listening. I hope you guys are acting. Do your job. Department of Health protects our health. Thank you very much.
Aloha, I'm Nohea Crutcher. Seems like everything I've wanted to say has been said and much clearer than I could. One of the things that I'm noticing is that if you listen to everybody here, we shouldn't even have a geothermal in the area. And I know a long time ago when I was checking on it, I read somewhere that it is safe only if it's at least 10 miles, and then somebody told me that's not even safe if the wind's blowing hard enough, which is what you're talking about. So when you're looking at it from a Western point of view, you have to go through all this. And what's sad is what's left out is the Hawaiian viewpoint. And it seems like every place we go, that's left out. Because if you listen to Tutupele from the beginning, from the very beginning, long time ago when the first geothermal went in, or was going to go in, Pu'o'o erupted right on that spot. Now what is she saying? Ole. And she's been saying ole ever since. I know there's some Hawaiians, I remember in Oahu, it was really sad to hear kumuhulas get up and say, oh, Tutupele, this is a gift from Tutupele. I don't know about you, but when I give a gift to a person, I give it to them. They don't come in my locked house and take it. If they do, they're breaking and entering. And I look at geothermal the same way. When you dig into Tutupele, you're breaking and entering, along with desecration. So either way you look at it, a'ole. I was not raised with my Hawaiian traditions because even though I'm in my 70s, my great-grandmother was already a Christian. And so I was told, we're Christians already, we don't talk about that. But what I noticed about all the Hawaiians, and now these were all Christians, and even though I grew up on Maui, where I grew up was closest to the last eruption on Maui. So Tutupele was very alive there. So I found it very interesting for them to talk about her like she was alive and still say, but we're Christians, we don't talk about it, you know? And then I come here and you got Hawaiians that are really, they grew up with it. And I'm kind of jealous of that. So I had to read on it. And what I found was there are some oli, some chants that say that her steam is hers. Oli you don't touch. I haven't found the actual chant, otherwise I would say it to you yet. I haven't found somebody. They say they've danced it, but then we get so busy we can't talk about it. But what I know is esteem is Tutupeli's mana, her energy. This is sacred to Kanaka Maoli, versus in an Anglo-American, nothing is sacred. Geothermal is sucking her mana, her energy. And I really believe that if we followed that way, we wouldn't be wasting money. I mean, I remember when the Adler study came out, you know, they spent how many thousands of dollars on that? And what are you hearing about it? Nothing. That suit, I think when those PGV had to pay a suit, they only paid like $23,000. And people who do permits on trees and break them, they pay $50,000. So that's what the American way of looking at it thinks of human life. It's pretty sad. I feel sorry for the DOH department here because I don't know what you're doing. You know, it's sad because, I mean, you get paid to help us. Yet when you look, you're not helping us, you're helping corporations. And I think this is about time you folks switch. We're living a new generation. You're not going to find people sitting around. Thank goodness Puna. I wouldn't have known any of this if it wasn't for Puna. But you folks that work for these departments have to change. You have to put people first. Stop putting corporations first. You will ruin this island. Go Maui. I'm from Maui. I moved here because of what happened on Maui. I mean, there's no country for me to move to. And I grew up in country. You know, so I really encourage you. We all need to take responsibility, each one of us. We need to do what's pono and what's right, and not just go do a job and go home. Really look at, listen, how many people got sick? I think if I had lived close, I would have been one of those that died because I have asthma. I'm so glad I don't live right by them. But aloha, thank you very much.
I'm absolutely opposed to this permit, particularly if it's anything like the last permit. This is such an amazing thing to me because I came in '91 when the blowout happened, '91 blowout, I was out fishing. I came home and I saw my community devastated. 3 days later, I came home and I see actually trees where, you know, the toxins were at, the trees were actually drooping, and there was a belt coming around the mountain from PGV, near PGV, around the mountain, so you could actually see it from the sea on the southeast side of the coast. You could see that, the vegetation drooping. And then we go through the process of the state Department of Health, not you folks here, but your colleagues years ago, right, absolutely denying that something bad happened to our community. They denied it. I do want to see a contested case hearing on this permit. Unless there are test wells around for the water, around PG for the water, they should not continue operations. Unless there is proper monitoring, and that is on site at the release valves, and they already have those monitors in their plant, already in place, because they monitor that plant 24/7. All we would need to get the base data from that plant is have a computer lead from them to get their data in real time. How much flow is going through that plant, what is actually being discharged. But oh no, that is private property. No, it isn't. The plant is in the middle of 2 subdivisions, and the population has grown. And the only reason that we even have noise abatement is because in the last 8-10 years, population growth has grown enough where enough people have come in and started making noise to this company and to the state to say that you have to do something about the noise, much less the periodic discharges. The main problem here is that this, as Joyce pointed out, this is an unholy marriage of industry and corrupt government and corrupt industry. And it's okay to pollute the water and the air. No, it isn't. It is not. It's the same nonsense that says, oh, for the farmers to pump a bunch of poisons into the earth and say, oh, it doesn't hurt anything. Well, as a lifelong commercial fisherman and a lifelong subsistence fisherman, the fact of the matter is, other than overfishing, industrial pollution is the biggest threat to the oceans today, right now today. We are not only killing our environment, we're killing the sea. And this type of operation is part of it. PGV is nothing more than killing people and killing us and killing the environment for profit. And you know, there is no reason for them to go on with this. This permit should be canceled until such time. They should cancel operations again until such time all proper monitoring is in place. They should not be in operation because they are killing us. Mahalo.
My name is Joyce Folina. I've been a resident of Puna since 1983, December. I intend to stay in Hawaii, preferably in Puna, for the rest of my life, which I hope are many more years. I'm now 73. I've experienced the blowout. I lived in Kalapana Seaview Estates. We were severely impacted because the trade winds blew the hydrogen sulfide to us and dumped it on top of our subdivision. Our subdivision is a mile from Kahena Beach in the direction of Opihikau. I woke up the morning after the blowout started. I woke up about 8 o'clock, which is about 2 hours after when I usually wake up. I was groggy. My phone was in a little cubbyhole at the top of my 1/5 of an acre property. I heard a roaring sound. I had running diarrhea. I had running mucus from my nose. My joints hurt. My head was exploding in pain. And I called the police department because I thought Pele, our volcano goddess, had exploded again at the top of our subdivision and across the highway up in the land up there, where she flowed from before in 1955. And when I called the police department, I was told they have a small problem at PGV. I'm not kidding. This is what the police officer said to me. And I said, small problem, my okoli. I said, something is wrong here. What's going on there? And he said, look, lady, I told you it's a small problem, and he hung up in my ear. At no time were we told to evacuate. We had more serious problems in Seaview compared to most of Leilani, the middle and the top of Leilani, because of the wind drift. The meteorologist that spoke to you earlier, I believe it's Chris. Chris could fill you in on wind drift and probable wind directions at certain times of the day and year. So this 1 mile radius of evacuation, I think it's ludicrous. We're talking about this permit. I'm not educated well enough to be able to dissect that permit, but I am a almost 32-year resident of Hawaii, and I have never in my life experienced anything like this corruption. Never. And I came from South Florida, one of the most corrupt states in the Union. But this is abysmally degrading and dangerous to everyone that lives in this Puna area. This, I call it an abomination. And I'm not particularly religious, but that's a good word for it. The unholy marriage of corrupt politics with toxic industry. You don't have the right to subject us to constant danger for the benefit of how many people are getting more electricity from PGV. That's against federal law. We are in America. I am an American. I'm second generation born here. Not in Hawaii, I was born near Chicago. I'm not ready to kill the DOH, politically speaking. We need the DOH, and we need the DOH to do a better job than they have been. Thank you.